Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Oxford Business Insights podcast, where I interview business leaders from Oxford and the surrounding areas to learn something of their business and their development and particular insights into their growth stories. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Attfield, who's the CEO of Energenics Europe Ltd, a company, business that's been going for over 20 years, specialising in fuel additives and future innovations in the fuel arena. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Energenics journey, but firstly, welcome, Mike. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning to you, Nick. Good to be here.
Excellent. Well, look, Mike, you're a chemical industry veteran. You've been in the industry, if you don't mind me saying, for quite a long time. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. And we're going to talk today a little bit about industry innovation, sales cycles, lessons from the growth you've achieved, and a little bit about what's next in a rapidly developing market. So you bring sort of 35 years of experience in fuel technology, a fascinating journey growing a small but significant business with clients from BP to Lubrizol to leading energetics. This is a story of sort of endurance, innovation, and up from getting to know you, values-driven leadership as well. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that. I'm sure our listeners are as well. But tell us, how did your journey into chemicals begin, Mike?
So I originally graduated from university with a degree in chemistry back in the mid-1980s. And at the time, I did what a lot of graduates wanted to do, which was join one of the sort of premium kind of oil and chemical businesses. So I joined BP as a research chemist in their labs up in Hull. And then spent a few years at the bench developing chemistry, and then gradually realised that actually I wanted to sort of progress a career more in the area of business and sales.
And did you move into sales within BP?
Yes, it was a transitional thing. I after about 5 years, I had the opportunity to become what's called a product manager, which kind of effectively is a bridge between the technical side of the products and interfacing with the sales force and directly with the customers.
Excellent. And then what drew you to around 2007? You came to Energenics specifically. So, give us a little bit of a background from that decision to move from sort of obviously a very big corporate environment into Energenics. What was then a pretty small startup.
Yeah. So essentially, I'd spent. By then, I'd spent about 20 years of my career with two businesses, firstly BP and then later Lubrizol, who BP sold us to as a business. And I kind of got to enjoy the experience within those companies of actually trying to start something new. So actually, I was quite attracted when I got the opportunity to join Oxfordshire back in 2007, that here was a business that had, it was safe enough that it had got out of the starting blocks,
right,
but it still had a long way to go in terms of establishing itself. And it happened to be operating in the particular areas where I had both commercial and technical expertise.
Very good. So just tell us a little bit about the main products. And take us back to that sort of in 2007. What were the specific products that Energenics was either developing or starting to sell at that time? And then we'll talk about the new products.
So by then, Energenics had established a division of itself that was called, well, at the time it was called Oxfordshire Energy. It actually only became Energenics about 2 or 3 years later. That was a change of ownership. But at that stage, there was a product developed called Envirox. And Envirox was the proposition to the market was that it was an additive for large diesel fleets, that if you used it, it would actually make fuel savings for you.
Right.
And to that extent, it was interesting. And it felt like something I wanted to get involved with.
Okay. And large diesel fleets, I think most people would jump to thinking fleets of lorries and so forth, but obviously this can go into railways and things as well. Is there any other applications that I'm not thinking about, or is it mainly sort of rail and road transport?
Yeah, I mean, road transport. In the beginning, the main focus for many years was actually on the bus industry.
Right.
But buses are a slightly kind of easier place in which you can actually prove that the additive works, because
Right.
buses tend to have a very kind of repeating
Yeah.
steady operational cycle compared to the sort of long haul trucks and so on. And then gradually over time, we progressed from the bus industry into the rail industry.
Right. Okay. Okay. And I don't know how significant it was, but you mentioned that Oxonica, you went into private ownership. Just tell us a little bit about that, because Oxonica was a small PLC, wasn't it? And then it was taken private. Just tell us a little bit about that. Did that have a beneficial effect in your view?
Yes, I mean, so Oxonica was actually a collection of about 4 different nanotechnology kind of startup kind of businesses, of which we were just one of those 4.
Yeah.
And and when we got to about 2009, Oxonica decided to effectively divest itself of those businesses. So our business, which was called Oxonica Energy, which was specifically about the Envirox fuel additive,
Yeah.
was sold to a private owner who's actually been our owner ever since. And
Right.
in many ways, that brought us this sort of stability that of being just privately owned without having kind of publicly traded shares and shareholders to worry about. It brought us a lot of freedom and took away a lot of pressure in terms of the immediacy of results, which is sometimes quite difficult to do given the nature of this product and its long sales cycles.
Excellent. Okay. No, that's really interesting, because obviously, sometimes small businesses can perceive that the way to go is to float in some form, and for some it can be, but it doesn't always have those benefits. And that's really interesting what you say. If you've got a long-term committed owner to a product that does have quite a long sales cycle, that can work perhaps better than the pressures of somebody who's reporting publicly every month, every quarter, or 6 monthly, whatever the requirement is. Okay, so tell us, you take us back to those sort of early years. I get what you're doing. You're basically selling additives that can hopefully improve fuel efficiency for transport fleets of one sort or another. How did you position your products? How you're a small company working potentially with pretty big customers and maybe competing with some other large suppliers as well. So how did you go about positioning and managing that sales cycle, particularly in the early days?
Well, I think in the early days, we realized that actually the sales cycles were long. Essentially, nobody would ever buy the product without having done an extended period of trialing. And trialing itself, in a real world operation is quite fraught.
Yeah.
Because it ends up being a great big kind of number crunch at the end of it to try and sort of work out the benefits. And then all sorts of things can creep into that. So we realized over time that the success rate was relatively low and the sales cycle was relatively long. And I certainly realized that actually it wasn't giving us the stable base for the business that we needed, because actually you ended up with a dependency on a relatively small number of very large customers. So what we did, or what I tried to do, was to say to ourselves, well, we already have this product that we're manufacturing and selling. What else can it do, particularly in the space with which it's in terms of diesel fuel additives? And as it turned out, there was a particular change in the emission standards, which led to the emergence of a new class of product as a sort of aftermarket treatment for motorists just to purchase, something that are called DPF cleaners, that are now well established in the market. And we were there right at the beginning of that, talking to the companies who kind of have the strong retail brands in many of the sort of leading world markets. And we kind of tapped into that as an alternative sales channel for the product we were already making, largely by encouraging them to launch this product and giving them all the kind of technical advice and support they needed to kind of bring this thing to market. So gradually we migrated from a small number of very large transport companies to a larger number of smaller to medium-sized sort of retail, consumer and garage trade businesses.
Excellent. And you obviously you developed relationships, but what was the main way of perhaps meeting potential new customers? Was this is the pre-internet obviously, but it was pre sort of social media. Perhaps people weren't sophisticated selling on LinkedIn. Was it industry events? How did you go about meeting new people?
Industry events were probably one of the biggest things. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit old school, but I still am a great believer in sort of relationship building and just having, B2B relationships where you're actually well known to your customers. You can exchange information fairly openly and collaboratively, in calls like this. Before this, when you actually went to see people face to face, and I do believe that's the way in which you can develop this kind of business, because essentially we were selling a performance ingredient. So actually knowing what to do with it, how to take it to market, how to get the positioning of a retail product right, tapped into a lot of our knowledge. So the way you kind of get introductions is really by targeting the people you want to speak to, and then just finding a way to meet those people. Trade exhibitions are particularly good for that. But to be honest, the kind of even now that the sort of LinkedIn selling doesn't really work very well with those kind of people unless they already know who you are. But cold introductions through that unfortunately falls into the same kind of basket as.
No, I can understand that. And so, and in terms of developing those relationships, I know you had one relationship that took 11 years to conclude the deal. It's probably a little bit exceptional, but that must have taken sort of quite a lot of perseverance to keep going with that. Was there any point in that? Did you think, is this ever going to come to a conclusion?
I mean, there were times probably during that 11-year period where I was kind of losing faith that it would ever happen. And to some extent, it was teaching me that that 11-year cycle customer actually was part of that original fuel saving fleet proposition. It was actually the state railway company in Ireland, Irish Rail. And it's no disrespect to them, they were just working through their internal processes. But that's the thing that made me realise that even if I could line up several more equivalents of those, we still might not actually have enough, kind of revenue to sustain us in the short to medium term. So although we kind of kept going with those that customer opportunity and others like it that we'd already actually had as customers, we tended to then really put all of our efforts and very much pivot towards the sort of bottled fuel additive treatment market, where this was a kind of a new growth opportunity.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. And you've got sort of the aftermarket partnerships with some quite well known retail brands that came in a bit later. But how do you manage those relationships? Is it any difference? Is it still the know, like, and trust Mike and your colleagues? It's still quite a personal relationship.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's really around being the knowledge expert in this particular niche where our core chemistry performs. For them, they have to deal with a whole kind of catalogue of products that sort of sit alongside that. So they cannot be as specialised in our particular area. To be specific, the product we're selling is what's called in the industry terms a fuel-borne catalyst, or FBC. And that's just a really, really niche field. So we are the sort of, well, we would say we've got the very best fuel-borne catalyst technology, and that's then translates into a product that the motorist would want to buy if they're faced with a particular problem which is relating to diesel particulate filter blocking. So we have to help our customers to make that translation of what the chemistry does to what does a consumer product do, and the claims that can go on the bottle that can be sort of validated, and then how do you pitch that on the shop shelf. So yes, we work with a few of the leading brand products, and so our products appear on supermarket shelves, in large motorist retail chains, and in other sort of stores that have car care sections.
Okay, and do those products presumably are sold internationally now, or are there specific standards UK and different countries? Is there much variation across Europe or further afield?
Yeah, well, effectively, the product is sort of gradually globalizing on the basis that I mentioned that the product helps to unblock a diesel particulate filter, which are quite prone to blocking up, and you only have to start talking to diesel motorists before their kind of eyes light up and they know exactly what you're talking about. Now, the diesel particulate filter is a really important device in an exhaust system that stops the horrible soot particles, which are actually classified as carcinogenic, causing cancer, being breathed in by the ordinary public. Now, those filters tend to be included in ever stricter emission standards. So it was first required in Europe from 2010 onwards, but gradually over time, China and India and a number of other sort of economies around the world have followed. Therefore, once you've launched the filters on the emission standards on new vehicles, the problems appear within 2 or 3 years, and then there's a demand for our kind of product. So recently, we've been effectively just following the globalization of this product around the world. So we've got sales in China, in Korea, Japan, Australia, and very recently some early stage sales in India.
That's good. No, that's really interesting. Okay, well, look, moving on, coming up a little bit nearer I know those are sort of work been going on for quite a few years. So bring us a little bit more up to date. What do you see as the challenges and that for Energenics to develop over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and also, I mean, I know diesel's going to be with us for a long time in terms of transport fleets and rail, I'm sure, but there is a decline in diesel uptake on standard motor vehicles or passenger cars. How do you see yourself adapting to that, and what are the other growth challenges you've got coming up?
Well, so yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, clearly, we can all sort of see the announcements from government, that are sort of driving the market towards electric vehicles. And you're absolutely right. Diesel will be around in some of its industrial sectors for many, many years to come. But the one area within of diesel usage that is probably earliest to decline and already in progress, effectively, is the diesel passenger car market. So, given that a lot of our volume now goes into that particular market through these diesel bottled fuel treatments, clearly it's a concern that the business will be in a long period of gradual decline. Although a lot of our products are used by medium-sized so medium-age cars and older ones. So actually, even if we stop selling them in 2030, they'll still be in significant proportions on the road for another 15 years. But that said, we then, some time back, particularly in my kind of R&D group, we started thinking more broadly about what does our chemistry do. So this is a bigger sort of diversification from the idea of fuel additives. So my R&D colleagues were kind of interested in some of the other properties of our core material. Essentially, our chemistry to the scientists are nanoparticles of a material called cerium oxide. Now, cerium oxide is well known to chemists to do 2 different things. One is that it's an oxidation catalyst, and that's the whole basis for its use in diesel fuel. But it's also well known to be what's called a UV absorber. So something, a little bit like we're familiar with sunscreen, things that you can put onto surfaces to absorb the radiation, the harmful radiation from sunlight. And cerium oxide is a particularly good UV absorber because it doesn't get consumed in the same way that traditional UV absorbers that do go into things like sunscreen and screen and coatings will actually be consumed over time. If you actually use our material, it doesn't get consumed over time. As long as it's contained and held on the surface, it will just continue to absorb UV for indefinitely. Okay. So we then started thinking about that property and where we could find openings for that. And we had 1 or 2 good early opportunities by taking part in collaborative R&D projects that were sponsored at that time by European Union research programs and also our own UK research programs, which managed to help us establish relations with other companies who might be potential customers. So we participated in a few projects and gradually evolved an important product range of UV absorbers for both traditional wood varnishes and coatings, but also an innovation as a direct treatment for wood. And these products, we called them surplus. So we had to create a completely new brand that was different from Envirox, which was our diesel fuel additives. And then we discovered, we made a really major, almost slightly fortuitous discovery that by applying our material directly onto wood, we could actually keep wood looking like it does when it's new and it has that attractive, brown appearance for really quite sustained periods. And as a personal, just a user of, decking in my own garden and garden chairs and stuff, I've always been frustrated by the way it all turns grey and looks a bit ugly. Very quickly. I know what you mean. I'm sure many people. So I thought there's got to be potential in the fact that we can actually, delay that effect from happening for quite significant periods of time.
Excellent. And so I know that's still quite an early stage in innovation, but is that, would you be working with partners on that? Would you try to sell that into some of the big wood treatment companies? Is that how you would see this developing?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much a work in progress, and in some ways there's a different challenge around the sales cycle, which is the same idea that everybody needs to prove it. And if there's a takeaway from all that we've done, there is that kind of, when you come along with some new innovative material, people need to check out that it works. And in the case of the wood treatments, the only way you can do that effectively is to run some tests. So you apply the material to pieces of wood and then put them outside. And typically you want to wait at least a year to have some sort of confidence of how it's performing, and then go for several years to see how long does it perform. So it is a sort of long, slow work in progress. But in many ways, there are a lot of parallels with what we've done in the sort of bottled diesel fuel treatments area. That the channel to market, especially if you want to get near the consumer, is that it's very difficult for a company of our size and scale to create a brand and get the product, distribution in place. It's much easier to work with partner companies who already have those channels to market in place and brands that the public know, and effectively for us to go in at the higher end of the supply chain, supplying an active material, and then for them to formulate products with it and to sort of offer them towards the market. So that's kind of the same approach we've been taking.
Okay, no, that's interesting. And what about sort of manufacturing your product? Whether it's the fuel product or new products, do you do in-house manufacturing? Do you subcontract manufacturing? How do you work in terms of to produce your product?
So we essentially, to make our product, we need, on an industrial scale, we need kind of large scale, chemical reacting vessels. And those are not the kind of thing that naturally go with, a sort of Oxford University spin-out company. I know from my past experience, even the larger companies I work for have used essentially outsourced chemical manufacturing. And there are manufacturers in the UK who kind of have a long heritage and are available to effectively take processes that companies like ours come up with and essentially provide the hardware and just make it on a sort of on a contracted basis. So we do use outsourced chemical manufacturers, but they work very closely under our control. We quality control everything they do, and they work for us, with our unique and special patented process technologies in order to to make sure that we keep control over the kind of core technology that's behind the products.
Excellent. And you see that, would you manufacture abroad if the foreign markets, would you manufacture in I don't know, China, India, outside of Europe, or would you think it'd always be something you'd control here and send out?
I mean, up to now we've got by manufacturing here and exporting. In fact, our export sales are more than 50% of the business in recent years, and so we have actually had quite a good successful UK export story. I think potentially in the long term we could look at that. I mean, there are tariffs do come into this, and particularly markets like India and China have got high tariffs on imported chemicals, and so that does make it a problem for us to be competitive. The way that we've managed it so far is we tend to manufacture concentrates for those export markets, which means that they can actually use local diluents in the market. So at least you can sort of be cost optimized in that way. But in the long run we could, but it would require just a lot of work setting up a sort of contracted manufacturing partner, because actually our processes are quite sensitive to being done correctly. If you don't do them quite right, you just make a load of horrible stuff instead of the product that we're trying to make.
Obviously. Okay. Well, look, that's a really interesting overview of the business, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about yourself, Mike. Do business first. What sort of lessons do you think you've learned in leadership? I know you have a loyal team that you very highly regard, that stuck with you for many years. What's your lessons in leadership, would you say, particularly sort of leading a company where the quick wins are difficult to get? It is a company that's got to be built incrementally, and persistence and consistency is probably key to success. So just give us a bit of flavour as a business leader, what you've learned over the last 16, 17 years.
I think the key thing, it's all about people, and making people work in an environment where they feel happy, they feel a sense of collaboration and community. When you're only a sort of 10-person type business, what are departments in big corporations end up being one person and sometimes only part of a person. So, and in some ways, a lot of people really like that. You can see stuff that you develop on the bench as a scientist, being manufactured and sold to customers. So the important thing is making sure everyone feels connected to each other and the relationships are strong. And I think openness and transparency from the leadership point of view, not trying to sugarcoat things, just be reasonably open about the ups and downs of our kind of, of our journey. But building trust in people, and ultimately we have been quite good at actually retaining staff. Most of our staff have got a lot of specialist knowledge over many years, and actually we've had very, very low staff turnover over the years that I've been leading the organisation.
That's good to have. I'm sure there's many companies would envy that statistic alone, and I'm sure that's down to your personal leadership as well as the values you bring to it. So what's next for you and Energenics, Mike? Do you see it sticking with it, seeing it grow? Obviously, hope to grow, but just from a personal basis, how do you think Energenics will develop, and what's your role within it?
So yeah, well, I certainly feel like we've created a really good business over the years I've been leading it, and obviously there's this kind of area of wood treatments where there's still a long way to go in the journey. But I also kind of note my own kind of age and my particular kind of desire to, shall we say, to sort of gradually step back from the business in the kind of years to come. So what I kind of envisage is a sort of gradual sort of decoupling of my role from the business, and probably just being, in the longer term, retained as a consultant. But I've been preparing my team for that for some time, and I see a sort of fairly seamless transition to my colleagues, and more or less keeping the business as we've known it, and then gradually just sort of moving in that direction, which will allow me just the opportunity to do some of the things that I do outside of my professional life. And do more of those. And
tell us a little bit what Mike does outside of business, because Energenics must be a pretty all-consuming thing. But I know you have some interests outside of the business.
Yes, well, so the main things that I do. Firstly, I do have a large family, and I now have grandchildren, and I obviously want to spend more time with them. But the other thing that I do is that I'm what's known as a reader or a lay minister in the Church of England. So I actually do get involved in leading church services, in writing sermons, and very recently I actually led my first funeral for a family member. Which is quite a privilege to be asked to do.
Absolutely.
That, but something that actually is quite satisfying to do.
Very good. Okay, well look, thank you very much for those insights about both your business and your personal life at the end. I think there's some great stories in there, from fuel additives to working with global partners, long-term sales cycles, Mike's, your personal leadership and how to build a business. The word integrity comes through very strongly about the way you talk about it, the products you do, what you try and do, and the whole team. So thank you very much for joining us, Mike. And just for listeners that may want to contact, there'll be in these details in the notes. There'll be contact details, but just tell us the best way to get in contact with you or Energenics if somebody listening wants to get in contact and find out more.
Well, I guess the two main channels is, firstly, I have a reasonably sort of high profile on LinkedIn. You can just find me there under my name. It's quite there are not many other people share my name, so you can find me under Energenics. And the more sort of from the company point of view, we have a website which is energenics.co.uk, and there's an info at Energenics email address, which again you'll find in the details.
Excellent. Well, I'd certainly encourage people to find out more about it, because I know it's a fascinating company, and I know if people really want to know about the product, can't really do that in 30-minute podcast, but I'm sure there's information on the website, or a conversation with Mike or one of his colleagues will do that. Finally, I would just like to invite listeners to like, share, and follow the podcast, because we try and talk to a variety of business leaders on a regular basis. But finally, once again, to thank Mike for sharing his journey with us, and look forward to welcoming you to further Oxford Business Insights in due course. Thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.